Welcome back to Detections Podcast. This is XL Detrades, and the other host tonight is...
Understudy 77.
Awesome. So we've got an interesting thing going on tonight. We're going to have some news to get caught up on, and we have a very relevant holiday topic. But I wanted to get started by saying thank you to all the listeners. We just looked at our statistics, and we just... what was it? Over 560 listeners.
Yeah, over 504 episodes. That is freaking amazing.
That is way more anything than my mind thought we'd be able to do. So that's awesome, but that's all thanks to the listeners finding value in what we're doing. So thank you for listening.
From us to all of you, it's a wonderful, wonderful Christmas and or holiday present, depending on your belief structure. So we appreciate that very much, and it fills me with holiday cheer more than I am already. I already have so much holiday cheer because I have a kid and she's adorable, and I'm so excited for Christmas. But people actually enjoying listening to us talk fills me with so much cheer.
Yeah. But also a little scared at the same time because I'm I normally just am full of shit, but somehow it's helpful for people. So yeah, there we go.
If it's any consolation, I am too. So, we're both in the same boat. We're good. That's also why every couple of shows we have an actual expert come on and talk.
Oh, yeah. So, speaking of experts, I know one of the big topics in our industry is this security blue team thing that's happening.
Yeah. Big topic. I don't know yet. I think they're still gaining some traction, but I will say, I took some time one night because, I get asked a lot, and I'm sure you do too, hey, I want to be a blue teamer. How do I get into this? What do I have to do? How do I start? So on and so forth. And I've never had a good answer because this work is hard, right? Chris Sanders, who is fantastic, had a whole post about you've got to find one port. I've got to look at 67,000. Or I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but it's really true. So how do you get into
wasn't it 65,535, which would be all of the potential ports available on a modern operating
that's
system?
Accurate. I don't know that number. You're blowing up my spot here. Anyway. But so really true. So it's really hard to tell people because there's this intersection and cross line between technology and art that exists to be a good defender. That is really difficult. But these guys, Security Blue Team, made this training called Operation Chimera. It was free for a while. Now it's €20 or £20, right?
Yeah, it's 20 pounds.
20 pounds. Super cool, though. I went through it. I mean, it's basic. It's entry level. I don't agree with every single thing that's in it. However, basic overview of phishing, IR, a little bit of SIM stuff. If anything, what I disagree with is that they follow the typical tier model of SOCs, and I think anybody who listens to this knows that I don't.
We don't, for sure.
But still, from a technical perspective, really cool training start and really cool way to kind of take a look and get into it. And I think you actually did the challenges. I didn't.
Yeah, I did the challenges just as because it was a few months that I was away from having, hands-on keyboard console activity, just to kind of see where I was at, how much I had lost in that technical realm. So I do like it. There was a lot of good basic information there, and I've recommended other people to jump on it when it was free. But a cool thing is, I actually got into the beta test for the full training and certification on that because I do like the direction that the developer known divide is going with the team, and I want to see what that's going to be all about.
Yeah, I'm really actually interested in this, and I think it's a really cool concept, and I really like what he's doing. I read through the course material, I looked at the questions, and I said, yeah, I feel relatively confident in suggesting this to people. Hopefully at some point we'll have him on to chat about it. There's a time difference, but I am really hoping that we can have him on to chat. But it does get, I think, the detection seal of approval in its current state, knowing that it's in a rough state.
Mm-hmm.
Not that our seal of approval means jack shit. Maybe someday we'll actually get to stamp a seal.
Well, we can always just pay for one and do it ourselves anyway.
Hey, speaking of, hopefully we'll be unveiling this episode with a brand new logo.
That would be so awesome.
I'm really hoping, like, there's just minor things that we need to tweak, but I'm really hoping we found a really, really good artist that we're really excited about. So I'm really hoping that we're going to be launching with a brand new logo.
Yeah, and he'll definitely get a shout out once we get the finalized logo of it. And we've got the last revision, I think, in place. And once we get that back, I think we'll be good to go.
Oh, hell yeah. On that note, though, like, it's been a while, right? It's been, what?
Yeah.
4 weeks since we've done news, give or take. So, like, we're a bit backed up.
We are, but we did have a pretty good reason why to get backed up. Having Blind Hacker on as our first guest was just awesome.
Yeah, it was really great to have him come talk. And, like, it's really cool. And, you know, it goes into that whole concept of, like, red help blue, blue help red. Like, we couldn't do this. And, well, I shouldn't say we couldn't, but, like, because he said we couldn't on air, which was great. Or he said we could on air. But, like, to have this concept where we can go, hey, man, what works for you? Mm-hmm. Well, hey, let's make sure we're looking for that. Like, that's valuable information.
Yep.
I like that. I was glad that we went that way.
And I think that we may have actually started, like, an actual section with special guest, because I liked how it went with the whole, would you like to play a game? And end our guest segment with a scenario and have them talk to a scenario based upon their expertise.
Yeah. That may or may not fit for every single one, but I think whenever we can do that, for sure. But because we're backed up on news, Exile, what's in the news?
Well, I think we're going to have to go back and forth on this because we both got some really interesting things going on. And I'm going to save my big chunk more towards the end because there's a huge topic to unpack with it. But I want to start with something that's a little bit focused on the industry that we're in, and that the Pen Test Labs, which is a testing platform for offensive security, put out a tweet about how they store their passwords. Did you read this?
No.
So what they do, and the reason I want to bring it up is because there was a huge kind of like constant retweet back and forth. But they generate the passwords internally to themselves and then store the passwords in clear text, and then any reminder emails, they send out the password that they generated in the email body.
Okay. Continue.
So, the first thing is how many people pushed back on storing passwords in clear text. That's just a thing that we typically don't like people doing because that allows people to get access to a password if they're able to get access to where it's stored in clear text. Now, their reasoning behind this was that they generate the password, so there's no way that it could be like socially engineered or somehow related to the individual because it's randomly determined by them. It's only stored within their system, and so it actually has nothing to do with the person themselves, which allows them to keep it in clear text and still keep the individual user privacy in place.
Okay.
So, your thoughts?
I mean, clear text passwords usually bad. But I mean, what's the rotation on them? What's everything else thinking? Like, I haven't read it. I'm behind. It's almost Christmas and I'm busy.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely something worth getting caught up on because I'm looking at it now and it had like 600 comments in like a day.
Ooh, that is a lot.
Yeah.
That is a whole lot.
There's a lot to unpack there. People going back and forth about how it's not good, them defending their viewpoint and the reason they're doing it. And then, of course, sometimes people jumping in with the emotional responses. But at least I think the conversation that they bring up with that, with dealing with how passwords can be or not related to an individual, is make it worth a look and just seeing what people are saying about it.
Yeah, I'm reading it right now. I'm not necessarily reading through like the whole thing, but yeah, we don't allow users to pick passwords. We blah, 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 blah. Yeah, largely I don't know that I agree with them. Mm-hmm. There's a lot better ways to go about this use case than that. I I think I was mistaken for a second. I was like, pen testing company, okay, but like no, like they're a lab company, like a learning company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me teach you how to hack our own shit.
Yeah.
No, so I have spent most of my time caught up in a completely different Twitter thing and conversation, right? So there's this individual, Andrew Thompson. He works at FireEye. At one point, I used to work with him, full disclosure, a little bit anyway. Smart guy. But he's been on this kick in this thought process, and I think it's a really good thought processing question. OffSec tools. This started with kind of proof of concept and then moved into like OffSec tools. So like genuinely available, freely available OffSec tools. Helping or hurting. And this is not something to dissect today.
No.
At all.
Way too big of a topic to do in like a couple of minutes.
Huge topic. But really cool thing to think about because like, I think when we went over background a little bit, like I spent 6 years in IR, right? Like traveling consultant, breach to breach. The majority of cases that I worked that were breaches outside of like malware outbreaks and stuff like that, most things come from commonly available hacker tools. So like attackers are 100% leveraging this stuff. And the question is, are we leveling up the bad guys by trying to level up ourselves from the OffSec perspective? And I think in that question, he's not wrong. The real question is, does it help us more or hurt us more? And that's not something I'm going to try to unpack today. But I would strongly suggest looking into this and reading it because it's a really interesting topic. It's very, very passion-fueled and very, very emotional right now. But I think the outcome of this and of us having this conversation now is that maybe we develop some kind of a solution before the legislators do it for us.
Absolutely. And also stay tuned because we have already discussed this is going to be an episode for us probably early next year.
Almost guaranteed early next year, yeah.
We both really want to unpack it, but we just basically wanted to tease everyone today with it.
Yeah, and like because it's the holiday season, like we want to talk about links. But we're going to get to that in a minute too. But like there's the problem with so many weeks in between is there's so much. So like I'm going to glance over some stuff that I had and then like we'll link it later.
Yeah, exactly.
New Chrome password stealer sends stolen data to MongoDB database. That's interesting. MageCart, you know, the group, switching tactics using man in the middle with phishing. Also interesting. Android stalker app cases increased by 373% in 2019, which is like apps to spy on users' messages and call information and stuff. Very interesting.
And what about all the ransomware stuff that's been happening since then?
Right. So Snatch ransomware reboots Windows in safe mode to bypass antivirus. Clever Microsoft phishing scam creates logical login for them. Like there's so much. But here's where things get interesting. And this is like the actual talk about thing, right? A lot of this ransomware that we've been seeing specifically has been targeted towards like dental offices and hospitals recently. So like medical providers are getting hit. Yeah, medical providers are getting hit. Dental offices are getting hit. And I think we talked about this. Service providers are getting hit.
Oh, yes.
So service providers of medical technology stuff are getting hit and basically shuttering hundreds of medical offices. Like you want to talk about raising the stakes? Like you're at people's lives at this point.
Yeah, now it's when it's going from that logical cyber world to actually affecting the physical world. And that's the kind of thing that will make legislators step up and make decisions a lot quicker.
Oh, God, yeah. Because you're talking about people's lives. So, like, the dental offices, maybe not as much people's lives, but still, during a major procedure, like, that could fuck you.
That's a quality of life thing for a lot of people, too.
Oh, yeah. But, like, a doctor's office, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like people on life support, shit like that. Ransomware starts spreading around. Like, that's a big deal. And we're starting to see that more. But we're starting to see that vector not just be the doctor's office, but the service provider for these hospitals. So, again, I think, you know, the more connected we get, and we talked about this, the more we're going to see this supply chain stuff. We're going to see service providers get hit more and more and more and more. Like, it's just the way it is.
And I've working for an MSSP, there are a lot of businesses.
I'm sorry.
No comment. There are a lot of businesses that look at using that service chain and an external service provider to leverage some of that business risk. So that there's still a very big market out there for that kind of service. So it's just another ripe, juicy target.
So what else do you got?
Well, let's go with the little bit more lighthearted one. I saw a pretty cool thing. So I know the Valve, what is it, the VR headset, right?
The Vive? I have one. It's amazing.
Yeah, so that's a big thing, right? But that's virtual reality. This augmented reality thing, I've kind of been tracking because I'm intrigued to see how this develops. But did you see that Niantic, the company that does Pokemon Go, Ingress, and that, they're working with Qualcomm to produce smart glasses that integrates with an augmented reality game like that.
So that you can just play Pokemon. I mean, this has been a concept for a long time. Like the first one was Google Glass, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had a buddy who beta tested Google Glass. It looked so ridiculous when he walked around wearing it, but it was also really cool. This thing. So there's a lot of really cool stuff about it, but there's a lot of really scary stuff about it too.
Like people driving with this on, right, and like getting distracted with the game itself, and it's going to be interesting to see like what sort of safety measures they do or don't put in place. But this is just another one of the things that I personally like to watch how this augmented reality is developing versus virtual reality, because virtual reality is that complete escape from the world. But this is just, you're still part of the world. You're still around humans. It just looks different.
So here's where my fear goes. I'm going to go dark for a second on your lighthearted topic. Not just like people driving in augmented reality, but like imagine the kind of software that comes out. We just talked about like Android stalkerware apps, right? Let's talk about real stalking. When you can put on a pair of glasses, walk down the street, go, oh, I like the way that person looks, snap photo, go scan, find social media profiles.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's some really, really terrifying aspects to something like this. And like, just pull up a bunch of available online information on that person, because without them ever knowing, because it's gesture based or whatever, they might never know that you're doing this stuff. Like, you might just have it built to do, like, blink 3 times, do this thing. Who the fuck knows? Yeah. But like, that shit gets scary.
It does. And then we get into a whole nother conversation about what's actually on the responsibility of the software development and the hardware developer to put safety measures in place, if any at all. Like, should it be a society thing? Like, there's a lot to unpack with that. But yeah, I mean, all of those conversations are good, I think. Helping people become intelligent and informed about this.
Oh, yeah.
So they can make an actual, like, informed decision about how to move forward with themselves and their family.
And technology is going to advance regardless as to whether or not you want it to. And it's going to be used for evil regardless, too. Like, look at deepfake technology. Like, that shit's also horrifying. And I remember a couple of years ago when I found thispersondoesn'texist.com.
Mm-hmm.
That's horrifying, too. Like, randomly generated real-looking people at the click of a refresh button.
Although some of the ones it does generate are hilarious.
Some of them are, but it keeps getting better.
Yep.
That's the thing. Every time I go to that site, it keeps getting better. So, like, we're going to get to a point that eventually, like, we're not even going to have to, like, people slow down when they want somebody to sound stupid. They slow down the video like it happens in politics all the time. We're going to eventually get to a point where you don't even have to do that. Like, deepfake technology is going to move so far along that you can literally just slander anybody and make it look like them. That's frightening.
And then what sort of technology or detections do we have in place to tell the difference between a deepfake and the real?
Exactly. We're going to get to a point where we can't trust digital content anymore, which, not that you can really trust digital content today, but it used to be you couldn't trust photo, but you can still kind of trust video. We're going to hit a point where you can't trust video anymore. And that's... Technology is wonderful and frightening at the same time.
Oh, yes. And speaking of that, technology being frightening and this stuff, that leads right into the big topic that I wanted to discuss.
Okay.
Was facial recognition and the legality of facial recognition in, like, airports and things like that.
Ooh, I actually have something for this one, too.
Nice. So I bring it up because the general metro area that I live in Portland, Oregon, Portland City itself is about ready to pass a law, or they're looking at passing a law that will outright ban all facial recognition done from any camera within the city. And it's as far as I can tell, it is the first city who actually has that ready to be passed as law to make it illegal to use facial recognition for anything whatsoever, both private businesses and government organizations. And it's becoming a hot topic. So some of the people that I've interacted with locally here who come from the legal standpoint that are looking at privacy are telling me that there's even stuff within the state of Oregon itself that's starting to look at how they can legally set boundaries on facial recognition itself. An example of the scary things is an article, the link that I'll provide here is a landlord who wants to install facial recognition in their homes of an apartment complex for tracking who should be in there and who shouldn't be there.
That's fucking horrifying.
Right?
I mean, that's horrifying to the level of like the DNA test results being used against you in medical situations and for insurance purposes, which is also a thing. But horrifying.
Yeah. It's man, like right, there's a lot, because the law enforcement angle on this is there is a lot of value to law enforcement to be able to use facial recognitions for tracking and locating people with arrest warrants out,
so
high value criminals, things like that, right?
Let's unpack that for a minute, because this comes into another really interesting topic, especially around this time of year when you're looking for gifts for loved ones. The Ring doorbell. Are you familiar?
Yes, I am quite familiar with all the stuff going on with Ring right now.
Cool. Let's talk about that a little bit, because it's similar, right?
Yeah.
So the Ring doorbell
similar.
is essentially a doorbell that shows you who's there. Also automatically enrolls you in a neighborhood watch program and tells you when things are concerning. Also automatically shares videos with law enforcement and Ukraine-based research team, which you can't opt out of. Like, that's a problem. So this company's had a lot of problems, like exposing users' home Wi-Fi passwords to hackers and spying on unwitting users, blah, blah, blah. Most recently, though, it came out that, like, you can't opt out of this, the whole, like, neighborhood watch thing. Like, using the Ring app automatically enrolls you in Neighbors. You can't opt out. If you're automatically enrolled in Neighbors, then your shit is automatically shared with police departments and their Ukraine-based research team.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine-based research team aside, basically, that doorbell alone can give anybody who has it, like, it gives cops basically unfettered access and warrantless access through permission to basically spy on the entire fucking neighborhood, profile all they want, and do a whole bunch of other shit.
With no checks and balances, no controls in place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that shit is fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
So, like,
I don't have a problem. Like, the balance that I make internally is, like, if there is a due process thing in place, they put in the work, they have a judge-issued search warrant, like, the privacy advocate in me may not like it, but I understand that, and at least there's some judicial backing to show the value need for that and exactly what they're looking for by this. But the unwarranted of it is what really scares me.
I have no problem with police doing their jobs.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And I have no problem with due process of law. But when you kind of start to unpack this topic, what I have a problem with in this is that you are giving them unfettered access to data. You can't opt out. You're stuck with it. You got a deal. That's just the way it works. I have an issue with that.
Yeah, which leads into the thing that DHS has been trying to do with the airport and facial recognitions, right? Have you read and heard about this?
A little bit.
So they're trying to implement a way with no clear way to opt out, but force all citizens, citizens and lawful permanent residents, to go through facial recognition. So basically, then everyone coming into or leaving the U.S. would be scanned by the cameras and have facial recognition ran against them.
I did see that. So before long, we're going to end up in a situation where literally, like, the whole world is a Vegas casino.
Mm.
Because you know they have better technology for that shit than anybody.
Yes, they do have those in-depth algorithms watching people's hands for cheating.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'll hit a couple other quick ones before we get to the main topic. One that's very close to my heart is not Die Hard. Die Hard's not the right word.
But Die Hard is a good Christmas movie.
It is a good Christmas movie. Not as good as Home Alone, though. Mac OS malware tied to the Lazarus group for APT. Really interesting. Stealthy, too. Trojan hiding behind a fake crypto trading platform. Believed to be the work of the state-sponsored North Korean hackers behind WannaCry. Really interesting. And interesting to see some of the APT guys starting to pick up Mac stuff. There will be a link there. There's hashes. There's all kinds of stuff that you can use if you want to look for this yourself, if you have a Mac infrastructure. There's a lot of really good stuff. So I would read the article on the blog when we post it, but we're definitely starting to see an uptick in the Mac stuff.
Well, they're getting more home and business market share now.
Yeah, I mean, they've had it for a while, and I mean, I could go into a whole spiel about like the reason why I prefer Mac and the reason why I think Windows sucks. And then somebody undoubtedly is going to be like, but Linux. And guess what? There's a new Linux vulnerability that lets attackers hijack VPN connections. Basically injecting arbitrary payloads into IPv4 and IPv6. CVE numbers for 2019 14899. It hits Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, Arch, Manjaro, Debian, MX Linux, Void Linux, Slackware, Deepin, FreeBSD, and OpenBSD, and all VPN implementations. So like, it's fucking serious. Almost all Linux distributions that they tested were vulnerable to the exploit of this flaw. There will also be a link to this too. But if you have a Linux server infrastructure, which a lot of people do now, probably worth checking out this article too. Then I don't see any more on your list, but there's one other one that I think we can talk about kind of briefly before we get into the topic, and this will be a nice lead-in, right?
Oh, yeah.
Disney Plus user accounts already found on hacking sites. Disney Plus hacked. Oh, my God.
I guess The Mandalorian was really, really popular.
Right? So, media sensationalism says, somebody got access to your Disney Plus account. We've hacked it. Selling them for $3 or so. Yeah, that about makes sense. That's probably about the worth of this thing. But what they don't say is, especially from a headline perspective, is there's not a security breach with Disney Plus. Like, they found email and password combinations reused by other people. So like password managers, password managers. That's what you can gift people that you care about as a password manager. It will help. 10 million subscribers they got already, like in a day, which is amazing. But like this concept of not exactly saying the right thing or saying fully it's difficult for guys like us, I think. Reusing passwords is not hacking, nor is it any flaw or vulnerability within Disney Plus. That's exploitation of a user that has nothing to do with the service that they're on. Anyway, go ahead. Throw your thoughts out there.
Well, I don't disagree with anything you said. It does nothing on the service itself. It does show the initial hype around Disney Plus. Like, I know you've heard me rant that I think Disney Plus should burn and die because of what they did with licensing, but that's a personal preference. But it just goes back to, some of the standard, what's the word I'm looking for? Advice that people in the industry like to give about passwords, of not reusing passwords, like you said, using a password manager to manage all that stuff. Or like even what I do, I bought my dad a password book that he writes his passwords in, and then just told him to use a different one on each site and then write it down in this book, because the threat profile for someone breaking into his house to get that book, to get access to his Gmail account, I'm not really worried about that.
That's fair, but I still do inherently find written password books to be hilarious. I think that's just the security person in me. Like, I find them hilarious. That's me.
But he was previously just using a Microsoft Word document with all the passwords listed in there. I'm like, let's make a small adjustment, get you to write this down in this book that's literally right here next to your keyboard.
As long as that doc's not online, it's not that much worse unless his computer gets popped.
Well, he was letting my niece at the time install whatever game she wanted to, and I had to go clean it up a number of times.
Fair point.
Speaking of children clicking on links and installing stuff, that's our topic of the night.
Don't call me a child. I'm a grown person, thank you.
You're a child with a beard. I mean, come on, get rid of it.
That's probably accurate.
Link analysis, because it's Merry Clickmas time.
It is Merry Clickmas time.
We've seen it. Like, there's an uptick of phishing emails and malicious links out there because everyone's in a giving mood, looking for things to go buy for people.
It's also benefits enrollment time for most companies, and it's going to be tax time soon. So, like, this is going to be
parties,
a concurrent problem going into the new year.
Parties, end of year giving to nonprofits, like tons and tons of opportunity to click links at the end of the year. And so, of course, why not get more malicious links out there, as it's a target-rich environment at that point.
Hell yes.
And I know this is a topic that you like to talk about, so why don't you get us started?
Well, I believe there is a question to start this topic that I would like you to start with.
So, when is it okay to actually click the link?
Always, with one exception. But mostly always.
Always. What is the exception?
So before I get to the exception, this is why I'm going to say always.
Okay.
And again, be responsible, please, people. And we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. But modern browsers, for the most part, are all heavily sandboxed. Tabs are sandboxed in almost every modern browser, meaning the likelihood of remote code execution from a browser, unless you're dealing with super APT, which does happen. We talked about a Discord vulnerability that could basically be exploited from Discord in the browser not that long ago on Chrome. So it does happen, but it's much rarer. There's not a lot of harm in clicking a link. Like, it can't do much based on that sandboxing. However, I would still recommend that somebody use a VM or a sandbox type environment or something that's, separated from the main network, just in the interest of overall safety. But let's talk about that one time that it's not. Because if you're an investigator or a detective like us, you might not necessarily want to tip off of an attacker that you're investigating them. That's really the one time to not click.
So, I have one response to that, and so what? I mean, so what if you tip them off? If we're looking at malicious links that are for a targeted campaign, if you click it, they know they're being researched. Typically, what they're going to do is go back. One, they're just going to push forward anyway and see what happens. So you have a way to detect activity that's happening. Or two, you're going to force the attacker to go back and redo all of that stuff, which puts your detection and mitigation team on high alert that something else was going on, and increases their detection or their ability to it increases their visuals to look at the detection. And because the attacker has to go back and redo everything, that's extra time spent, which means the campaign is now less profitable.
So 2 questions. First question. Well, I guess one question to start. At what stage in an investigation does link analysis usually happen?
Usually right at the beginning.
Okay. So right at the beginning. That means one thing for sure. That thing is, you don't know the impact yet. You don't necessarily know if other people clicked. You don't necessarily know if there were other lines of that attack vector. There's a lot of things that you don't know when you click, which is why you wouldn't want to tip somebody off. The second one is from a detection perspective, to be completely honest. If they think they have something that's working or they have a domain that they've compromised that they think is good, once you blow up that spot, you might have to go make completely new stuff or completely new threat intel. Like, you may have completely lost your handle on that attacker. Right? Mm-hmm. That could be gone because you had this handle and now they've got to go change everything. And now that handle is gone. So those 2 reasons, because you don't know the scope of your own incident yet, potentially. And because when you blow up your spot and they have to change, you might not find it the next time.
So that brings it back to something we've talked about on a few other things too. What is the individual organization's response and risk appetite that, right? Some of them just say, who cares? Deal with it, block it, make them go back, start over from the beginning, and others don't want to blow it up.
Correct. And there's things that you can do other than just block too. From your own perspective, like there's some really cool educational opportunities that exist as well without tipping off an attacker, like black holing as opposed to blocking. So you're still letting, any potential communication go in, but when anybody tries to go out, it's completely black holed.
Yep.
And you can black hole the training resources for people, which means when they do click that thing, not only do you know that person clicked a bad thing, you can send them training.
Yes.
Really cool concept.
Well, and on that too, like we can do a follow-up question here is, during the early stages of the investigation, when you're investigating links, how do we determine what's good and what's bad?
So it ultimately depends on where it comes from my perspective. So like if we focus specifically on emails within like phishing or, links within phishing emails, which is where the majority of these things are going to go.
Oh yeah, by far the majority.
Phishing emails usually have a specific thing. So you have headers in emails, which are going to kind of tell you where it's come from. Is it spoofed? So on and so forth. More so though, any phishing from a link perspective is going to have a call to action. That call to action may be looking for a response and contain no links. It may be click on this attachment. It may be click on this link. That call to action alone can be a good indicator of like somebody's really trying to get me to click this thing. There's also URL shorteners and hiding URLs, so on and so forth. Continue.
I think a big indicator for me, even before you start looking at the link itself with that call to action, is in that call to action, how much of it is derived from a fear, uncertainty, or doubt basis, or that FUD acronym that we like to use, because those tend to put more people in a mental panic state, which will make them more likely to click the link. So that is like just a behavioral thing that I will look at in relation to the link before I go look at the actual link itself.
I also look for the endorphin high. Congratulations, you've won a free MacBook. Shit like that. So look for plays on extreme emotion, be that fear or be that, joy, or you've won, or, if it's too good to be true, it probably isn't, so on and so forth. So you're basically looking for not only a call to action, but somebody appealing to emotions. The technical perspective, though, is from an email perspective, is the hover over.
Yep.
So, that link could show like apple.com, but when you hover over, it's badstuff.com.
Yeah. Or just a jumble, right? So that's where like you mentioned, the URL shortener services. It could just be a jumble of words that go to a website hosted in like Brazil that they hide behind goo.gl or bit.ly, so that when you do the hover over, you don't even see where it's going.
And another one is weird like slashes, so weird links, not necessarily domains. One thing that was really common when I was doing investigative work more often was, a lot of malware staging happens on completely legitimate sites, often like state and local government sites and stuff, like old sites that don't get updated often and don't have really technical people. A lot of times it's fucking WordPress. But, so when you're looking at like Iowa State Gov or iowastate.gov/DJ457/ blah, 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 /.exe or whatever. Typically when you see, when most people lay out their site from a logical perspective, they don't do random / pieces. Some sites do, like fuck the podcast site that we're on right now does. But most sites don't do that. It's not particularly common and not something that you would typically see in an email. So like, it's a good indication. Also, like if you want a free iPad, why would it be from iowastate.gov? Like, unless you're maybe in Iowa, but worth thinking about. But it's another good indication is kind of looking at the layout of that and the entirety of that link, seeing what that looks like, and then saying, well, this looks suspicious, as opposed to like bleeping computer /news /security /new Linux vulnerability, blah, 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 right? Like that's pretty easy to read. There's no random characters. There's no jumble there, so on and so forth.
Now, you're talking about the jumble too. Have you encountered or worked with Punycode much?
Not a whole lot.
I'm assuming you're at least a little familiar with it. So for those that are not familiar, Punycode is a way that they get non-English characters to work inside of URLs or web server relationships. So it typically starts with X-ray November, XN -- and then a string of things that then converts to a non-English character. I've seen this
that
used also
like
as a way
English
to either do like make an O with the accent mark look like an O without it being an actual O.
Sorry, I've seen it a bit. I'm just bad at terms.
Yeah. I've seen that too. And to me, that's one of those like anomalous things because, born and raised in the United States, like I typically just only see things in the English characters. So when I see things come in that are using like Cyrillic or Han-based characters, which is Russian and Chinese, that's another thing that just makes me perk up and be like, well, this is not a normal thing.
Yeah, and they get really hard to determine just from the eyes, right? Like
Yep.
you actually have to do a little bit more than just a look to notice. And that gets really interesting. So, and we talked a little bit about URL shortener services as well. Redirect chains we can talk about as we actually get into analysis and investigation piece,
Now,
which we could actually probably talk about.
We could, but I think because we mentioned the one exception.
Okay. Oh, hey. So he dropped. Hopefully he'll join back here in a second. Hey, and we're back.
Yay!
Hey, look at that. We're back. I'm going to actually have to fucking edit this. Thanks.
Shit, I'm sorry.
I'm going to leave this part in there.
Nothing changed on my side. Like, everything looked the same.
That was weird. Yeah, you just completely dropped off the feed. It was really weird.
Huh.
It said, warning, we haven't seen Exiled in 10 seconds, so we presume that they've disconnected. Anyway, we're going to continue, so go ahead and pick up from your point.
Where did you drop off?
You were in the middle of talking. I just said, oh, he's gone. So just start.
I covered the puny code. Oh, I was saying we talked about the one exception to clicking the link, targeted campaigns. And I asked about the cost versus risk of researching those URLs using a search engine like Google.
That's fair. And you can, right? And I think as we get into some of the research parts of this, like how to look into this, we can talk about like good things to do to not actually click, but still see what somebody else knows versus good things to do to click and see what somebody else knows.
Correct. But I think part of what I wanted to mention too, after hearing your thoughts, was something to be aware of when you're doing this is things like Google Analytics. There are various analytical platforms that actually check the search functions done against the indexes and then look for keywords in order to track their campaigns. So there is a potential risk in doing that when you are doing link analysis of using these open search engines like that.
Agreed. Thankfully, there's a lot of we've come a long way with like Google Safe Search and stuff like that too.
Yep. Yeah, I think at this point, because some of the other stuff we have here actually gets into some of the specifics of how to do this.
So let's talk about that.
Yes.
We got some time. So in those 99% of use cases where clicking is perfectly acceptable, and I encourage that you obsessively click away after you've checked your company's risk profile and they're okay with it. Always follow your handbook, people. Don't be me. Don't just not listen and do things your own way. We really get into some tools that exist, and these extend in multiple different ways. So there's sandboxing. There's URL, lookup engines and IP lookup engines.
Yep.
There's scanners that will do it for you so that you don't have to do it yourself. So why don't we start with lookup engines? I feel like that's a good place to start.
It is, and at the beginning of the investigation of a link, that's typically what's done too, right? Most people, the first thing they do is this a known bad URL?
Yep.
So they go to sites like URL Void. They go to VirusTotal. Now, SiteTrail on VirusTotal has a couple of different spots. They have the upload and then the search.
Correct.
Now, the difference here goes back to 99 versus 1% use cases, where you can do an active scan on VirusTotal, which means it will conduct an active lookup at that point, see what it finds versus searching things that are already there. So 99% of the time, it's fine, but if you think, the potential 1% of a targeted campaign, use the search, because then it's only going to look at stuff that's already done and only queries their database instead of conducting an active, fresh scan.
I'm actually going to adjust a little bit. We talk about the 99 to 1% as far as tipping off the attacker goes, right?
Yep.
You're still within the same company. You're still coming from the same IP space. Even on commodity stuff, you could be a user who got the email or whatever the case might be, right? The moment you move it to a tool like VirusTotal that's publicly searchable, you're no longer just a random person. You're now a security researcher. That's guaranteed. So I'm going to change the 99 to 1 in a use case like this, where those search results and those searches and those scans are publicly available to the attacker. They know VirusTotal hit them. Another good one's URL scan. They know that you hit them. You're talking much more like a 75-25 maybe in this use case. Like at that point, it's guaranteed pretty much that it's a security researcher.
Or at least a hobbyist, right? Like someone who's at least leaning in that direction.
Correct. It's not just somebody who's potentially clicking, it's somebody who's doing way more than that. So I genuinely tend to not go that route. I genuinely tend to do manual link analysis. So I genuinely tend to either click the link myself, get the link, which we talked about a little bit, or there's, sandboxing and automated sandboxing as well, things like Cuckoo, but those are coming from your own place. So there's Hybrid Analysis, which is a website which is going to show you hybrid analysis, right? Hybrid Analysis, access my website. Oh, fuck, somebody's onto me. Or there's like Cuckoo, completely free sandbox application that you can install yourself. I've been running it for a long time. You can put it in a bunch of different packages, but when you run that, it's coming from your infrastructure or your VPN or whatever. That's going to be much harder to trace back to security researcher. I just did air quotes. I don't know why no one can see it. But
that'll be for when we do our first video live recording of a podcast.
But one of the things that, so you're now changing your profile a little bit. You're not just clicking the link. You're going a step further. You're using a research tool to look into the validity and scan the link. That's a major red flag to an attacker, and they check that shit. Probably more than they check their own fucking logs, to be honest. So I would personally avoid that more than I would clicking the link. Thoughts on that?
I wanted to back up a little bit and say a thing that I liked about hybrid analysis is if you can do just a search of their index also, which doesn't tip anything. So if it is something that is likely a known bad, you can use that as a check to see work other people have already done, so you don't necessarily have to repeat it.
Agreed. And one of the upsides of URL scan is you can do a non-public scan.
Yep.
So you can do a private scan, which means it won't show up in the front page in searches. The attacker will still see it coming from URL scan because you're physically scanning it, but it won't show up for everybody else.
Correct.
Which has some additional benefit.
Yeah. There's a lot to it that ultimately comes back to the organization that you work for and how they want to deal with that stuff. I know in the government space that they have a lot of things that are very strict no-touch policy, which really limits how you can do it. And then you have to go back to doing the manual analysis like you're describing that wholly stays within that controlled government space and never leaves outside of that in order to tip a hand.
Yep.
Now, something that sucks is some of the tools that are used that do this automated lookup on these incoming links is, let's say it's a targeted phishing email and it has a link in it. They will do...
you might have Proofpoint, and Proofpoint's going to automatically sandbox.
Exactly. Links. Stuff like Proofpoint, Cove.
But that's expected. Like, attackers expect to see that because so many people have Proofpoint.
Yeah, but it was just in relation to the no-touch. That was one of those things that constantly comes up in a conversation about that. These tools are doing it in an automated fashion, coming from that space, and it's like, is this or is this not? But it gets back to, as far as the individual researcher is looking, definitely pay attention to what your organization has set as the risk threshold for it. Personally, the all manual stuff is fun. You get to dig in. You get to be technical. You get to break stuff apart, figure out new ways to find the same information. So
you get to look at websites from like a debug view, which is fun. And so we glanced very briefly on like URL Void. One of the things that's cool about URL Void, and this is what I'll say, like it's a search engine, right? So you drop it in a URL or an IP address because there's IP Void too. It basically looks through like known blacklists and will tell you if it's there. So it's basically like VirusTotal for links and IPs, where VirusTotal will do that with hashes and stuff that you upload, tell you what AVs hit it. This will tell you what known blacklists hit it, and that's worth mentioning because it's a really useful tool. But there's some other stuff about link analysis that's really interesting. One of the most common pieces of link analysis, and this will lead right into like detection, right? Yeah. At least some of them. We have a lot of them, but this will lead right into it. And then we have a final special segment to end the show. when you're doing link analysis, credential harvesting is one of the biggest things. We briefly mentioned redirect chains and things like that, right?
Yes.
So oftentimes when you're looking for this stuff in your environment, it's not the initial link that matters. And this is why link analysis is so important, and actually following through on link analysis is so important. Because if it's credential harvesting, or if it's a redirect chain that leads to a download, you could look for that first hit, and that's cool. Like, oh yeah, somebody in my organization clicked that link. Okay, that's bad. But once you put in credentials, it could redirect you to somewhere else. It could redirect you to the actual page. It could redirect you to whoever. Unless you feed it like some fake or bullshit credentials, or maybe you have some like, a legitimate looking user set up or whatever, right? I typed in my password wrong as the user who has sent this email. It doesn't really matter. But unless you actually follow through, you're not going to understand your impact. Because the impact of seeing like, this guy clicked this link, it's whatever. Like, it doesn't really do anything. However, the impact of like the next stage after he entered credentials, that's a much bigger fucking deal. And like, that's why doing full link analysis is so, so important, because you need to understand what's past that first link. You need to get through the gates, understand what's there, because what comes next is what you look for during an investigation. That's not so much a detection as it is an investigation thing, right?
Yeah.
But you really have to know what comes next. Like, that's why link analysis is so important, and why I really believe strongly in doing it in-house, because even if you had a virus total or even a sandbox, unless you're interacting, it's not going to feed fake credentials. It's not going to go through and do these other steps that take you there. Like, manual link analysis to me is a big deal, because that's going to get you to the next stage.
And from a professional point of view, SOC analyst, honestly, that's where it starts to get really fun, right? Instead of just like going through these alerts, we're like, hey, we get to actually dig in. We get to learn how this stuff is working. We get to see how it's being targeted. Like, that, the detective in me drools over that stuff.
Yep. Well, I also want to understand the risk to my company. So,
yeah.
Okay, we got a credential harvesting fish. That sucks. Oh, somebody put in credentials. They moved to the next stage. That's worse. Like, I need to know that part.
And wait, or the people that like click the link and it doesn't work. Then they move to a different computer, click the link again, and it doesn't work. Or they put in their credentials like 3 or 4 times because it didn't work. It's like, that is someone that we need to work with the training security awareness group to get some really focused extra knowledge on. You can also
find some really cool stuff like that. And there's also some newer techniques, and I don't know your familiarity, but like bypass techniques, where they basically embed the legitimate login script and then like capture your cookies and information as you actually do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, you go to whatever website to log in, it's not that website. It's like xbank.com, bad.
Yep.
But once you put in your creds, it actually takes you to the bank site.
Yep.
That's going to tell you like, oh shit, like they're doing a bypass technique, which is a thing. And like, that's a whole different story, because the user actually logged in. Like, it's not suspicious to them anymore. They got to their account.
Yep. And it's not difficult to do, going back to the future topic and the whole offensive security tools being freely available, is there's a lot of tools out there that they can just be like, clone this bank website, and it pulls down and recreates the entire website to have the look.
Yep. So let's talk about detections, because there's, we talked about investigation, which is probably the bigger part of this one.
Yes.
But like, let's talk about detections. Like, how can you just detect links that you should investigate in your environment?
So for me, an easy early indicator are things like shady top-level domains. You can look at certain registrars that are, I have learned to have less than stellar, like, individual background checks to see who's registering for this stuff.
GoDaddy.
Well, there is a whole conversation we can have about GoDaddy, but also stuff like Freenom, Enom, right? Freenom allows people to register for free domains. They can stand up whatever they want, use it. There's some stuff that if it actually starts to make money and get hits, Enom pulls and owns that and basically takes it over. But it's one of the ones that you can just, for a campaign, stand up a domain, run it, tell it gets, reported as malicious, drop down that domain, spin up another one somewhere else. Krebs on Security, which we have a link to, I think from a couple years ago, has a whole bunch of shady top level domains. But for me, that is a start that I did when I was working inside the SOC as an analyst. Was I set up individual searches who look for these shady top level domains, and I'd say in a week there was probably like maybe 50 domains to look at.
Nice.
So
there's a couple others that you can sit in too, right? Newly created domains become really interesting.
Yep.
Like if you're pulling from a domain register, you're looking for anything like less than a week old. That gets really interesting.
Less than 6 months really doesn't change much on the signal to noise either.
True. So there's that. There's we talked about registers a little bit. We talked a little bit about shorteners, like shorten bit ly links and stuff like that. Pretty uncommon.
Yep.
Those you literally have to click on to see what's on the other end. Like it's the only way to do it. Or
using some of the tools like in the IP URL void or unshorteners, you can put it in the website, let the web server do the breakdown and extend the domain back to the original one, and then you can see it there without actually ever putting it on your system.
Yeah, but I'd be curious on some of the unshorteners if they actually have to touch the back-end domain, which I would assume that they do, which is, again, a tip-off of investigation as opposed to just clicking it yourself.
Well, and a way that can be tested is if someone sets up like a web server in their own lab, send it through a shortener, and then watch for incoming requests.
Not it.
So I was just going to say another thing along that line too is looking specifically at anything for an organization that has a public-facing login page where you have to present credentials. How many of those actually need to have an incoming request from a cloud service like Google Cloud or AWS?
True that.
The use cases, I think, are pretty small, where if you have an organization that's working within a cloud platform, all of the authorization and authentication happens within the virtual data center or the private clouds in that space, and so it rarely leaves from an edge location to go to a local server somewhere else.
So here's a fun and novel one, by the way. One that I haven't actually tested, but I do think it's really interesting. And if anybody does test it, please let us know. Display link versus actual link. Like, it's a really interesting concept. So, like, display link could be like google.com/login, and actual link could be like mrjonesfreesite.com, whatever, right? Like, there's this whole concept of like, can you take an email match and like look for .com and what comes before the .com, and then see if you have within a entropy or variance pairing of X number of characters to make that work. Because like the shortening part will be normal, but are they similar or how different are they? And you can actually probably tune that difference.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Now, it's funny you mentioned entropy, because one of the other ones I wanted to bring up in my days of using Splunk, using this app called URL Toolbox, it allowed the URL to be broken out into its individual sections. So you had top-level domain, root domain, subdomains, and then all of the information being passed to that web server through anything else also broken up, like the cookies or session tokens, IDs, things like that. So you could search each one of these areas individually. And what I would end up doing is using a Shannon entropy check just on a subdomain, because I noticed like if something was using domain masquerading or a DGA to generate these things randomly, like some malware and ransomware does, just as a random domain generation for its C2 channel, and waits for that to catch up to wherever it's at on the server-side cycle. But using entropy and looking for high entropy stuff on just the subdomain.
Yeah. And there's one more, and like this is the easy one. This one can definitely generate a little bit of noise, but we're going to call back to episode 2. Using your threat intelligence. So like, for the most part, if you have any type of intelligence, be that paid, be that open source, be that whatever, there's a high likelihood that you can, well, it's not a high likelihood. You absolutely can take that information in from, that was not off air.
Sorry, that showed
a high likelihood that you can take that stuff in, bring it in, and then do this whole concept of like, all right, I've got these suspicious URLs, let me check proxy or email. I've got these suspicious links, let me check here, let me check there, and then kind of do intel matches off things that other people have determined are bad. So that's not necessarily going to catch the brand new stuff, but it is going to catch some, like, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, and it is useful, especially when you tune out the noise.
I'm really sorry about that. Like, it literally showed that everything was muted. I don't know why it didn't mute
No,
it.
you were not muted.
I just sent you proof. Like, the thing was literally red. Like, the thing was muted.
It's all right. I would just like to say that when people are listening, that was exiled, not me. I'm more professional than that. Not by much, but a little bit. Oh, okay. So is it time for our special segment?
I think it is time for our special segment. I mean, that was a lot of information for people.
A lot of information.
So there's definitely some helpful information in there. But our special segment, I'm pretty excited about because it is a pretty cool time of year.
Nerdy Clickmas presents, or geeky Clickmas presents. For those of you who have children like myself, I spend a lot of time like researching cool toys and stuff because I'm a giant kid with a beard, but also because I have a kid. So we want to talk through like what can you buy your kid if you're not sure yet. And these will all be linked on the blog as well. The first one, and the one that I'm excited about, I did buy this for my daughter this year. I've been waiting to buy this for my daughter since before she was born. Is a toy called Cubetto. It is a wooden, screenless programming toy. And it's super dope. So basically you get this box and you get adventure maps. And you can buy a bunch of different adventure maps. I bought all of them. But then you get this board, control board, with function blocks. Move forward, turn right, turn left. And then there's additional function stuff like you can do random and reverse and some other stuff that you can buy separate. Basically, you're mapping out the way this robot moves and trying to get it to a specific point on the map. But you can also introduce at the bottom this concept of functions. So like, oh, I always move forward like 3 spaces at a time. So like, let me pop in a function cube and put 3 spaces in as my bottom function. So like, it teaches the basics of programming to 3 to 6 year olds, which I just think is so freaking cool. It does it in a screenless way. Also so freaking cool.
I mean, I might buy one of those for myself because all I have is a cat for a kid, and that sounds hella fun.
My wife keeps telling me, like, you got this for you.
Yeah. So that reminds me of another thing that I always look at buying for myself that is also a fantastic, nerdy, geeky tech Clickmas present. Lego Mindstorms.
Yeah, Mindstorms are dope.
These
Lego
are awesome.
In general is dope.
Yeah.
Mindstorms are dope.
But Mindstorms, like, it's that whole new level of Lego. And I always try... I've actually done this. When I found out my nephew was really getting into like, he's like less than 10, like 9, 8, somewhere in that range. But when he was about 6 or 7, he was starting to get interested in like base robotics and building things. And I'm like, I'm going to buy you a Mindstorm and get you started correctly early.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then we would be remiss if we didn't mention M is for Malware.
Oh God, this book
that teaches kids about information security.
Kids / executive management. I mean, it's all around good.
I agree.
Yeah.
We would be very remiss if we didn't mention M is for Malware. It's awesome, and it's definitely worth checking out, and it's relatively affordable.
Now, this next one that's on here is something you were telling me about. You want to tell me more again? This Kano kit?
The Kano kit. Yeah, man. So the Kano kit is a Raspberry Pi build kit, and it comes in all different kinds of stuff. So, like, there's a Star Wars version. There's a Harry Potter version. There's all different kinds of stuff. Touchscreen, blah, blah, blah. It's basically a build-your-own Raspberry Pi and code kit, and they have all different kinds of them, and I think they're awesome. And they're actually offering a whole big deal right now, which is also awesome. But they've got Frozen, too, if you've got little girls. But it's a Raspberry Pi build-your-own computer kit, which is super dope.
And I think you have one more on the list that you're looking at, quote-unquote, for your kid.
Oh, I have 3 more on the list. The next one is for people with deep pockets. It's the DJI RoboMaster S1. It's like a battle-ready robot that's super freaking cool, but it's like $550. But it's a build-your-own robot kit.
Did you just say battle robot?
Yeah, it's like a build-your-own robot kit. It does like lasers and it shoots water and stuff. Like, it's a like real-life BattleBots like for kids, but like you actually have to build it. So it's probably older kids, but dude, it's so freaking cool looking.
Sounds like perfect for us kids.
I want one for me. There's also a thing along the lines of the Kano kit called the Hack Computer, which is kind of cool. A laptop that teaches kids to code. It's an Asus 14-inch laptop, but it's got its own OS and its own software that basically lets you like flip and turn around to do hacking stuff. And And then I'm going to go completely off mark to one other one. I own this. I've built it. I think it's awesome. My kid loves it. She couldn't help me build it yet. We'll probably build another one when she gets older. It's called a Piecade. So for all the Raspberry Pi fans out there, there's a group that makes a 10-inch like mini arcade cabinet, joysticks, buttons, the works, called the Piecade. Comes in a kit. You put it together yourself. You supply your own Raspberry Pi. They supply a custom board that you plug everything into. You hook it all up. You play. You put games on it. It's freaking awesome. And I have one and I love it.
That sounds like it. It reminds me of I have a friend who would use Raspberry Pis and then put it in things like Altoid 10 kits, things like that, but run it as a Game Boy emulator. So he would build these Game Boys and all these different like normal everyday objects using a Raspberry Pi. Yep. And this sounds very much like the same kind of thing.
There's a lot of these little kits. I did another kit for something that's like Game Boy sized. Shit, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I wasn't as impressed with that as I was the Piecade, though. And the Piecade's now Raspberry Pi 4 compatible. It has a USB-C version, which is cool. But like this thing is so like I built this thing to take to my office and like sit on my desk at my office, and then I just never did because like my kid comes in all the time and goes, "We play games." And I have a 4-player huge arcade, like 40-some-inch screen in my dining room. But like this little thing is like the perfect size for my little kid, so it's really cool.
Nice.
That's what I have for nerdy, geeky Clickmas presents.
Yes, and that's I think what we have for our episode today.
It is.
So we want to wish everyone a Merry Clickmas. Thanks again for all the people that have been listening, and we want to remind you to go forth and find badness.